Today at 1, after turmoil on the financial markets, pressure grows on the Prime Minister to rethink her tax-cutting plans. In office for fewer than 40 days, but Liz Truss faces calls to change course. A cabinet colleague warns against changes at the top.
I think that changing the leadership would be a disastrously bad idea, not just politically, but also economically.
And this lunchtime, Downing Street has insisted that there'll be no more U-turns on the mini-budget. Also on the programme. Fewer operations are being carried out by the NHS in England as the waiting list for treatment hits a record high. The Metropolitan Police is investigating more than 600 domestic and sexual abuse claims against its own staff. Ukrainian fighters who defended the Mariupol steelworks until they had to surrender to Russia. We hear the story of one of them on his release.
When I look at this, it actually reminds me of me because it's the exact same as my glasses.
And the young people hoping to see more emojis that look like them.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Liverpool's 7-1 Champions League win at Rangers might be the result that galvanises them after a poor start to the Premier League season, with Jurgen Klopp saying it's lifted the mood.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Downing Street is insisting this lunchtime there will be no further U-turns, despite pressure intensifying on the Prime Minister to rethink her tax-cutting plans following last month's mini-budget. It comes after the government last week abandoned its plan to abolish the 45p tax rate for top earners. But senior Conservatives have continued to voice grave concerns at Liz Truss's tax-cutting measures without explaining how she will balance the books. One MP last night accused the Prime Minister of trashing blue-collar conservatism. Downing Street says its policy is the right one for growth. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake reports.
Just 5 weeks into the Liz Truss government, these are difficult days for the Conservatives at Westminster. MPs are in revolt over the not-so-mini budget, and there's pressure on the Prime Minister's policies and her position. From a Cabinet Minister this morning, a call for calm.
We've got to recognise that we do need to bring certainty in the markets. I think that changing the leadership would be a disastrously bad idea, not just politically, but also economically. And we are absolutely going to stay focused on growing the economy.
Hi, Chancellor. Lovely to meet you.
The Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng is in the US meeting officials at the International Monetary Fund as MPs back home call openly for changes to the sweeping tax cuts he announced last month.
There are many, myself included, who believe that it is quite possible that he will simply have to come forward with a further rowing back on the tax announcements.
I think it's better to have looked at this more carefully in the context of what's happened over the last few weeks and say, I think we've got some of this wrong and these tax cuts need to be introduced over time.
It is indeed a topic of conversation around the tea rooms of the House of Commons as well, because we can all do the rough maths and see that it's very difficult.
There's anguish, anger and downright despair among Conservative MPs about the government's position. The fact that a Cabinet Minister has warned publicly against a leadership challenge shows how serious things are for Liz Truss. A move against her looks unlikely for now, but there's no doubt the Prime Minister faces a fight to salvage her economic plan. Labour doesn't buy the government's argument that there are global factors behind recent financial turmoil.
They've crashed the economy, they've sent mortgages prices sky high, they've damaged the UK's reputation on the world stage, and we're all left paying the price. A Tory crisis made in Downing Street.
For now, Downing Street insists there'll be no more U-turns on the mini-budget before the Chancellor's statement at the end of the month, and that the Prime Minister's sole focus is on delivering economic growth.
Speak to Jonathan, who's in Westminster for us now. Jonathan, the mood you've described there is clearly febrile. What's going to happen now?
Well, Rita, purely from a practical point of view, lots of Conservative MPs and others here at Westminster are just struggling to see how the government's position can hold, given that they've said they will take forward all the measures remaining in the Chancellor's mini-budget and that they're not going to cut public spending to pay for those billions of pounds worth of tax cuts, and that they want to reduce borrowing and bring the debt down in what they say is the medium term. So, given all of that, there's no surprise really that there is continued speculation that at some point the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, will have to bow to pressure and perhaps scrap or at least pause or delay some of the measures announced by the Chancellor last month when he stands up on the 31st of October to flesh out those plans alongside forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility about the impact they will have on the economy. But as you've heard, as of this lunchtime, Downing Street insists that there will be no more U-turns and that the Prime Minister's focused on taking forward her plan to grow the economy. But I'm told by Downing Street in the last few minutes that position still stands, so watch this space.
OK, Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Blake there. The waiting list for routine NHS operations and treatment in England has hit a 7 million point for the first time. This includes surgery for things like hip and knee replacements and cataracts. It comes as the NHS continues to struggle to return services to pre-pandemic levels. NHS figures released this morning also show that nearly 400,000 people have waited over a year for these procedures. But the NHS says that over the last year, 2.8 million people received a cheque for cancer after an urgent GP referral. That's an increase of almost a fifth compared to before the pandemic. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson reports.
I haven't always been able to walk as far as I'd like to walk, specifically due to the hernia, especially early on when it was very painful.
Marcus Mansukhani has been waiting for a hernia operation for close to 4 years. During that time, he's received just one letter from the hospital.
Now it's more about how it looks, how it appears. Even it's obvious now when I'm standing up and walking. I can't get away from it. I can't conceal it anymore. So I tend to stay home.
A record 1 in every 8 people in England is currently waiting for NHS treatments, but the number of operations being carried out is 12% lower than it was before the pandemic, and outpatient clinics and minor procedures are down by 4%, according to BBC analysis. And that's the reason the backlog is growing. Surgeons say operating theatres are being left unused because of staff shortages, a lack of beds, and complications relating to COVID.
Very often, it's not clear until the morning of the operating as to whether it's possible. There are times when there aren't the necessary beds available, particularly if critical care is needed, an intensive care bed, for instance. And that's terrible for patients because they come into hospital expecting to have their operation. And if there aren't the necessary resources there to support that, then unfortunately they have to be cancelled on the day.
And it's not just treatments where there are long waits. Today's figures show only 71% of patients in English A&Es were seen within 4 hours in September, the worst on record. Senior NHS England officials say there's no doubt they're under huge pressure.
We are making progress. August we undertook more cancer checks than ever before, over 250,000, and since February, when we started our recovery programme for long waiters for treatments, we have reduced the number over 18 months by a quarter.
The NHS was once seen as the most efficient health service in the world, but experts say it can't work miracles.
The NHS is trying to be as efficient as it can and maximise its resources, but I think you have to fundamentally look at the resources. Compared to other countries, we still have fewer doctors per head, fewer nurses per head, far fewer hospital beds per head. So even the most efficient system in the world can only get through so much work if it hasn't got the fundamental resources it needs.
The government says it's creating surgical hubs and diagnostic centres in communities to help tackle the backlog. But others have described the record of 7 million people on the waiting list as a grim milestone and warned it will be worse when winter begins to bite. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
A court has heard that a nurse charged with the murder of 7 babies wrote, "I am evil, I did this," on a piece of paper found by police in her house. Lucy Letby is also charged with attempting to murder 10 other babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016. She denies 22 charges in all. Our correspondent Judith Moritz has been following this case, and we can talk to her now. Judith, evidence cited in court in this case is distressing. Tell us what happened.
Yes, this morning the jury listened to the prosecution wrapping up their opening statement, and they were shown some images on a screen. Now, we learned that after Lucy Letby was arrested, the police had searched her house and they discovered various writings, various pieces of paper she'd written things on. The jury was shown one of those notes. Now, they heard that amongst the writing, she had protested her innocence. She'd asked occasionally things like, "I've not done anything wrong, there's no evidence to support this." She showed frustration that she wasn't being allowed back onto the neonatal unit. But one note in particular was shown on the screens inside courtroom number 7 on green note paper with black scrawled handwriting. The prosecution said to the jury, this note said on it, "I don't deserve to live. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough." It said, "I'm a horrible, evil person." And in capital letters, "I'm evil. I did this." Now, there are other writings on the same piece of paper, including things like, "I'll never have children or marry. I'll never know what it's like to have a family. I haven't done anything wrong." And then in capital letters, hope, panic, fear. Well, just after the jury saw that note, it was the turn of Lucy Letby's defence to open their case. Ben Myers KC showed them the same note. He said it was the writings of somebody who was demonstrating anguish, not guilt. He said that the defence case will largely rest on the medical evidence here. He said what we have is coincidence. He said anyone who approaches this case as a done deal has got it very wrong. And the case will continue this afternoon.
Thank you. Judith Moritz reporting. Postal workers have begun a new strike over pay and conditions, with a further 19 more days of action planned in the run-up to Christmas. Royal Mail says it needs to modernise its service because it's already losing £1 million a day. But the Communication Workers Union says it'll mean a poorer service for customers and threatens jobs. There have been fresh missile strikes overnight near the Ukrainian capital Kyiv and on the southern city of Mykolaiv. It comes as 14 NATO countries, including the UK, pledged to send advanced anti-aircraft weapons to Ukraine. Well, earlier in the conflict, another city in the south, Mariupol, was devastated by repeated Russian bombardment, and a corps of Ukrainian defenders spent weeks besieged in the Azovstal steelworks. After being told to surrender, they were taken captive by Russia and then unexpectedly released in a prisoner exchange last month. Well, our Kyiv correspondent Hugo Beshega has met one of them and joins us now from Kyiv. Hugo.
Rita, I think few believed that those fighters would ever be allowed to return to Ukraine. Many of them were members of the Azov regiment and were described in Russia as neo-Nazis and terrorists. But there was big surprise last month when they were included in a major prisoner swap. And one of them was Ilya Somailenko. And he's been telling me about how he was treated in a Russian prison and the destruction in Mariupol.
They've been destroying civilian blocks. We've seen these with our own eyes, and we were like, it's hard to understand why they're doing this. We were just doing our job, and we were trying to make it as best as possible. We had nowhere to retreat because we were encircled. Thousands of our comrades, battle brothers, they're still captured. We should not ask the people who returned from being captured, or who returned back, about the details. Yeah, because the details, well, this is obvious things. Yeah, obvious things that people who are captured, that they are tortured by the Russians. Well, I just been in solitude for 4 months in like relatively normal conditions. I knew this from the guys in Olenivka, that with each new week, their conditions became worse and worse. You just can, find some videos on the web about the conditions in Russian prison, just for the regular prisoners, yeah, and multiply this by 2, and this will be like the conditions in the Russian prison camp for prisoners of war. They don't give a care about the rules of war. They don't give a care about the Geneva Committee. statements. They don't give a care about the lives of the people. Yeah.
Most people thought that it would never be released. Did you think that you could be released?
When it was captured, it was a very big chance for us to stay in Russia and never came back. It was extremely huge. So
you're prepared for that?
Yeah, we were prepared.
Was there any moment that you just sort of, you had lost hope that you would be released and returned to Ukraine?
You should never lost your hope, but the hope should not obstruct your vision and perception of reality.
How has it been with the family for the first time?
It was, well, like after all this time, it's happy to see like my beloved ones. It's happy to see my friends. It's happy to see the people who've been waiting for me. But it's a bittersweet moment because I know that hundreds of families still waiting for their warriors. The Russians still torturing them, still keeping them in the inhumane conditions. And that's why it's our top priority right now. It's to restore ourselves, to return to the battlefield, and we have to return as a solid unit because we have to take our boys back.
The time is just after 1:15. Our top story this lunchtime. Downing Street insists there will be no more U-turns on the mini-budget as pressure grows on the Prime Minister to rethink her tax-cutting plans after turmoil on the financial markets. And coming up, we ask why more than 100 unaccompanied child migrants have gone missing since crossing the Channel into England.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, there are calls for a streamlined 10-team premiership as rugby union's financial crisis deepens, with Wasps likely to follow Worcester into administration and out of the league.
The BBC has learned that the Metropolitan Police is investigating more than 600 allegations of sexual or domestic abuse against its own officers. The force established a special unit to examine possible criminal or unprofessional behaviour after a series of scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons has been given exclusive access to see some of the work currently in progress.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday.
It's not a glamorous title, but the Met's new Complaints Resolution Unit has been set up to improve the force's reputation by resolving disputes with the public.
Just to say, there was a big public order incident in Dalston. It was kind of very instantaneous.
When our cameras were allowed in, this had just happened after routine checks of scooter riders.
I literally happened to be in the area and saw on social media there was a police operation.
Someone was arrested at the Moped event for immigration offences. He was actually wanted missing for immigration.
The police had restrained someone on the ground. Batons had already out by that point. What the hell? Hey, what are you doing? Where there was the video of them punching him repeatedly.
There was a lot of it in the press and on social media.
There was nothing I saw that justified the use of force that I witnessed against members of the public.
Vicky Lewis refers the case for an independent investigation.
It's really easy to take a short clip of an event that may have taken a lot longer in reality, may have been 20 minutes and a clip is 2 minutes. You don't see all of the surrounding circumstances. I think you can't ever know what it's like to be in that situation.
Eventually, the officer was found to have no case to answer, but the Met says it's taking a swifter, tougher approach to police wrongdoing because of horrific incidents like this.
A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a woman disappeared.
Sarah Everard's murder. The big issue now is abusive behaviour within the police.
We've gone through the sort of counter-allegations, as it were, and what he said and what your response is.
So the Met set up another unit to investigate its own officers.
This team is specifically being brought together to focus on the offences of domestic abuse and sexual offences, where the offender is alleged to be a police officer or a police member of staff.
These are the physical assaults, this is the sort of controlling behaviour, this is the... Do you see what I mean?
This is distressing work, but
I hear many officers say, I want to come and work on your team, I want to do this. They are disgusted by these officers' behaviours. They are horrified, in fact.
Someone that I worked with, text messages began just being quite familiar.
This young officer met us in uniform to discuss her experience of blowing the whistle within the Met.
And then it sort of progressed to being more sexual.
She reported her concerns to the new Domestic and Sexual Offences team, recruited as experts in investigating abuse.
It just felt like they asked the right questions that made you feel like what you were saying was valid.
Annette, how many allegations are being dealt with in the Met right now?
So currently we have around 400 allegations.
400 allegations. That seems like a lot.
It does, it really does. And there's been an increase recently of reporting.
The new Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has made rooting out abusive officers a top priority. Scotland Yard is braced for more bad headlines. Tom Simons, BBC News.
And we want you to know that that report was filmed by the BBC's Rafe Ballantyne, whose death was announced earlier this week. Rafe has been described by colleagues as one of the most talented, creative and considerate shoot editors of his generation. And indeed he was. The conspiracy theorist Alex Jones has been ordered to pay over £860 million in damages after falsely claiming the 2012 Sandy Hook school shooting was a hoax. 26 people were killed, including 20 children. The families of 8 victims and an FBI agent alleged the radio host's misinformation led to a decade of harassment and death threats. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes reports.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please listen to your verdict as it has been accepted and recorded.
An emotional response from the families to this colossal award of damages. They took Alex Jones to court after he claimed for years that the shooting at Sandy Hook School was a staged government plot to take guns from Americans and that no one had died. The right-wing radio host called the parents of the victims crisis actors, but he now acknowledges that the attack was real. The jurors decided he must pay millions in damages for promoting the lie that the shooting was a hoax. The families told the court they'd suffered years of harassment, including death threats. Robbie Parker's 6-year-old daughter, Emily, was killed in the attack.
Our lawyers helped give me the strength to finally find my voice and to fight and to stand up to what had been happening to me for so long, and for how I let my voice be taken away from me and my power be taken away from me.
As the jury's decision was being announced, Alex Jones called the verdict delusional and mocked the outcome of the case. Outside the court, his lawyer told reporters they would be appealing.
My heart goes out to the families. We live in divided times. They've been weaponized and used for political purposes in this country, in my view, and today is a very, very, very dark day for freedom of speech.
It seems unlikely the families will receive much, if any, of the damages ordered by the jury. Alex Jones and his company have filed for bankruptcy in Texas, and he still faces a third defamation trial. Peter Bowes, BBC News.
More than 100 unaccompanied child migrants have gone missing since crossing the Channel and arriving in England. They've disappeared after being put up in hotels by the Home Office. Charities are now warning that the children are at risk of being trafficked by gangs. Seema Katecha reports.
The waters that would carry them to a better life. At least that's what they hoped. Some charities believe the reality is far different, with children at risk of being manipulated by evil gangs once they get here.
Across these pebbles walk lonely children who've risked everything to get this far. Some have fled war and persecution. But what are their next steps? To a temporary hotel, with a risk that this brief stepping stone could lead to a new, unknown peril.
FOI data obtained by the BBC shows that from those young people placed in hotels, 116 are missing. One of them has been missing since January.
I mean, if we don't know where they are, they could be dead, they could be being criminally exploited or sexually exploited, behind closed doors and nobody knows what's happening to them.
Yeah, I was in the lorry and then I came here.
Rashaan fled from Sudan several years ago. She was just 17 when she arrived here and is worried these children could be trafficked.
If I was being in a hotel, yeah, and nobody to talk to, and the trauma that for me to come to here and the terrifying journey, smugglers though who say to them, if you go to this place, you have to pay us back, you have to pay, otherwise I'll kill your mum or your family.
Some 65 charities have said the problem lies with the children being placed in hotels by the Home Office, arguing they're not safe. This started happening in July last year, when some councils ran out of suitable accommodation. But some say the government has little choice at a time when resources are stretched.
The alternative is to put them in secure accommodation and treat them like prisoners, which we don't want to do, and that would not be appropriate at all. So it's a sheer weight of numbers issue, which is why we have these sorts of problems. But that's no excuse for not properly having the details and keeping the tabs on the whereabouts of as many of those people as possible, and particularly unaccompanied children.
The local government association says ministers need to act urgently to stop using hotels and is working tirelessly to find suitable placements. When a child goes missing, you imagine the worst, and when they've disappeared in unfamiliar surroundings, they could be even more vulnerable. Seema Katecha, BBC News.
The government's approach to its plans to deport some asylum seekers to Rwanda is inherently unlawful and unfair, the High Court has been told today. In a hearing brought by the charity Asylum Aid, the court was told that the tight timescales involved in the policy mean there is a risk that people may be removed without effective access to courts. Well, we can speak now to our correspondent Dominic Casciani, who is outside the High Court for us now. Tell us more, Dom.
Well, this is the second part of this enormous, great big legal fight over the Rwanda plans. Last month we heard about the general principles of whether the Home Secretary could send anyone at all to Rwanda. Now we're actually getting into the meat of whether or not how people are being selected for the flights. And quite simply, what we've learned today is the Home Office has a plan to select migrants and potentially put them on a flight to Rwanda within 3 weeks of them arriving on the chilly shores of the Kent coast, from there to the equatorial landscape of Rwanda. 3 weeks. Now, what one asylum charity is saying today is this is inherently unfair because it doesn't give people enough time to mount their arguments about why they should stay in the UK. I've got to be honest, they've had a pretty rough ride today from the judges in court, who've said they're very sceptical that people can't explain to the Home Office why they shouldn't be put on the flights. The judgment in this case and the other parts of whether or not Rwanda is lawful is going to come maybe at the earliest in a couple of weeks' time.
Dominic, thank you. Now, a teenage girl is on a mission to transform the way in which spectacle wearers are depicted on emojis, saying that glasses are always presented as portraying someone geeky. Tim Muffet has the story.
The nerd face emoji.
The glasses and the teeth, they've got a weird kind of grin about them that for some reason they've decided to associate with a nerd.
Why does this say nerd?
Obviously the glasses.
Is that fair?
No, not really, because not everyone who wears glasses are nerds.
One little boost of confidence.
It's also annoyed 13-year-old Lowry.
It's not very nice for somebody who wears glasses, especially if it's their first time wearing glasses, to find an emoji that is a nerd and be like, oh, now I wear glasses, am I that? She has glasses and she's really relatable to
When it comes to changing attitudes towards glasses, Lowry has achieved impressive results.
Please may you make a Disney princess which has glasses.
When she was 9, she wrote to Disney.
I think that would help people to know that they are beautiful no matter what.
3 years later, Encanto was released. Disney says that Lowry's letter helped inspire the character of Mirabel, the first Disney princess to wear specs.
Hello everybody, I'm Lowry.
Now Lowry has a new mission. Not to ban the nerd face emoji, but to have the option of adding glasses to others. She's hoping for support from her schoolmates.
Anyone can submit a proposal for a new emoji. Designs are either approved or rejected by the Unicode Consortium, a not-for-profit organisation based in California. The nerd face emoji was approved in 2015.
Lowry's written to the Unicode Consortium asking it to consider her plans.
I'd love to see the option to add glasses to face emojis similar to changing skin colour or hair colour as you've already made available. I love this one as well.
Lowry has certainly won over these students at her school.
Would it make a difference, do you think?
Yeah, it makes it seem like the emoji is like actually been sent by me.
It's not representing a nerdy face, it's representing a smile and a happy face.
I just think it will make a big difference because when I look at this, it actually reminds me of me.
This one's my favourite. Oh.
Lowry doesn't know if her letter will have an impact, but if it does, it'll be another very impressive achievement. Tim Muffet, BBC News, Nottingham.
Time for the weather now. Here's Chris Fawkes. Chris.
Rita, we've got a real mixture of weather around this afternoon. There will be large parts of the UK that have blue skies like we've seen here in Capel Curig, Conway. Often one of the windiest places in the UK. It's quite still today with plenty of calm weather, but further southeastwards, the overnight rain has been really dragging its feet across the extreme south coast of Sussex and Kent. You might find a few spots of rain still left over here. And then towards the northwest of the UK, the weather is beginning to deteriorate as another band of rain starts to move its way in across Scotland. And also you can see the rain working into western counties of Northern Ireland right now. And that rain will continue to edge its way in over the next few hours. But that still leaves large areas of Wales, the North Midlands, Northern England, eastern Scotland with glorious weather and plenty of sunshine. And for many of you, it continues to be pretty mild as well. Temperatures 14 to 17 degrees for England and Wales. About 12 or 13 degrees for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with those temperatures here a little bit closer to average for the time of year. Overnight, quite a bit of cloud, a few mist and fog patches, a few patches of light rain or drizzle here and there as well. But not desperately cold. Temperatures about 9 to 12 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow, it's a changeable kind of weather day, really. This is a band of rain, a cold front that's going to be bringing some wet weather across Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England through the day. South of that, there'll be a few patches of rain likely to develop, although there's some uncertainty about exactly where the wettest weather will be across England and Wales. It's going to be mild though, temperatures reaching around 18 degrees across parts of East Anglia in the southeast. Contrast that with temperatures that are a little bit below average in Scotland. Well, the reason we're seeing those big temperature contrasts is down to our jet stream, which is running right across the UK. The jet stream brings us that boundary of milder air across most of the UK, but a colder area on the northern flank of the jet stream. That's bringing those fresher and cooler conditions to Scotland. Now on into the weekend's forecast, low pressure stays firmly in charge, and it is a weekend that we'll all see rain at some point, but equally it's not a complete washout. We start off with a band of rain across Scotland, England and Wales, moving out of the way. Then come a load of blustery showers. Those showers will be widespread across western areas, perhaps with an odd rumble of thunder mixed in. Temperatures still mild for England and Wales, still a little bit below average for Scotland and increasingly Northern Ireland and the far north of England. Might be quite a quiet start to Sunday though, with a few mist and fog patches around, bit of sunshine, but then another area of low pressure spins in from the southwest, bringing some heavier rain into Wales and parts of western England as we go on through the afternoon. Still mild for many of us, we've still got that cooler air though across Scotland. Rita.
Thank you, Chris. And a reminder now of our top story. Downing Street insists there'll be no more U-turns on the mini-budget as pressure grows on the Prime Minister to rethink her tax-cutting plans after turmoil on the financial markets. Well, that is all from BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.